Hi all, welcome to my channel again. So today we are going to discuss about setting up a webhook. So in this session we are going to discuss about what is a webhook and how to set up a webhook in GitHub and how to automate the task one through webhook. Task one which I have explained in the previous session, we are going to automate that in this session through webhook. So that whenever we commit a change in the GitHub, the build should trigger automatically without the interference of anyone. And the next one is task 2, which is configuring task 1 using Docker Compose. Task 1 we did only with the Docker. Then here we are using the Docker Compose to configuring the task 1. So let's create a CI/CD pipeline for your Node.js application. Let's start. I have mentioned everything in this blog. If you want to check out this blog, you can check that from this link, which I will be providing in the description box. Now let's start. What is a webhook? So let's automate the build process with the integration of webhook and GitHub. So let us say we are going to create a build process using the webhook. So GitHub Webhooks gives developers the ability to integrate with the GitHub platform. Developers can subscribe to events taking place on GitHub. For example, push events that occur when code is pushed to a repository and respond to the event with an action. So whenever there is a push event that occurs, then the code is pushed to a when the code is pushed to a repository, the push event occurs. So that will respond to the event with an action. So the response action can be anything, such as database entry in an external application, or sending an email, or triggering a deployment process, which we are going to discuss now, and more. Actions you can perform in response to events on GitHub are limited by your imagination. So when a subscribed event occurs on GitHub, GitHub triggers an HTTP post request to the defined destination. So that destination is specified as an HTTP URL, which is the endpoint that is to be called whenever that event occurs. So we need to give a HTTP URL when we are configuring this webhook, so that the endpoint handler at the webhook URL handles the action to be performed in response to the event. So that when an event occurs, the endpoint handler at the webhook URL should handle the actions to be performed in response to the event. So setting up a webhook is I'm going to show you now. For this you need to have the SSH key to your server, so that you can save that in the GitHub here. So once the SSH key is saved, so the SSH key is from the server side. So that we are saving in the GitHub. So once that is saved, now go to the code repository and navigate to the settings. So in settings, provide the details in the webhook section, the payload URL, which is the Jenkins URL, which is important, so that whenever an event occurs, the it should um, it should give the response in the build trigger session, so that it whenever push event occurs, it will trigger this URL that will build the job in the Jenkins. So that we need to give this payload URL as the Jenkins URL. Then configure with the necessary details. Once configured, then now the webhook configuration part is done. Now we are going to automate the task 1 through the webhook. Since it is done, the task 1 which I have explained in the previous session, now we are going to automate that through the webhook, so that whenever a developer pushes the code into the GitHub, the build should trigger automatically without the intervention of anyone. So make the changes to the file in GitHub. Since we have already configured the webhook, whenever this a change occurs, it should trigger the pipeline in the Jenkins. So once you change the file and commit that, then you can check in the Jenkins. It must have triggered automatically by webhook. So the job must have automatically triggered whenever the push event occurs. So once the job is successfully finished, then navigate to the URL to see the changes that you had made in the code of the GitHub. So here you can see it is the 8000 port, which is the task 1, and Docker, which we have exposed it to. So here it got executed, and we have gotten the output without the intervention of starting the build job manually. So this is an easy task for developers. Without the DevOps team need, they can trigger this by themselves, because whenever the developers want to build the code at that time, at that moment itself, without wasting any time, then they can trigger the job using this method, by just pushing the code into the GitHub, so that the job will get triggered automatically. So that's how the webhook works, and webhook helps the developers. Now, next part is configuring the task 1 using the Docker Compose, writing a Docker Compose file for the application. So let's write a Docker Compose file for the application. So task 1 is we are taking this from the previous session, which I have explained already. You can go and watch that video. From there, we are taking this task 1 details. So we are editing this file, writing a Docker Compose file for the application, and go to the Jenkins job, and in build steps change the commands. Previously we have mentioned only the Docker commands. Here we are keeping the Docker Compose commands, which will remove all the containers and will create the containers. So after everything is configured, now we can trigger the build. So once we build the project, and the build is successfully completed, then finally navigate to the URL, then you can see that it got output is we got the output successfully. So here we just used the Docker Compose instead of using only the Docker container. So thanks for watching until the end. That's all for today. And if you want to check out this blog, you can check that from this link, which I will be keeping in the description box. Thanks for watching.